I had been 4 years gone, and I came home to Sweetgrass certain there was nothing left of me a living soul would want. The stage set me down at the end of Tamarack Street on a gray afternoon in late October, and I stood there with my one bag and my borrowed coat and let it pull away without me, and for a long while I did not move. The town had not changed the way I had. The same false fronts leaned over the same boardwalk. The same church bell hung in the same crooked steeple. The river ran behind it all the way it always had, low and brown and patient under the first cold of the year, with the Bittern Range standing white-shouldered above the far bank the way the mountains had stood above every day of my boyhood. It was all there, just as I'd left it. I was the thing that had come back wrong. A man I half knew passed me on the walk and tipped his hat and said, "Caleb, Caleb Ardmore." The way you'd say the name of someone you'd heard was dead, and I said yes, it was me, and he shook my hand and looked at my face and did not know what else to say, and neither did I, so he went on. That was the first thing I learned about coming home. The town remembered a young man who had ridden out to scout for the army with a straight back and an easy laugh, and what had come back in his place was a quiet, careful thing that flinched at loud noise and slept 4 hours a night, and could not remember, most mornings, what it was he had thought he'd be glad to live for. I had not written ahead. I want to be honest about that because it matters to the rest of it. I had a reason I told myself, which was that I did not want anyone troubling to make a fuss, and a truer reason underneath it, which was that there was one person in Sweetgrass I could not bear to write to and could not bear not to, and so I had written to no one at all. Her name was Nora Brennan. She had been the schoolmaster's daughter when I left, 23 years old with ink on her fingers, and a way of arguing with you that made you want to lose, and I had loved her since I was a boy too poor and too proud to say so. And the last thing I had done before I rode out to the war was stand at her father's gate and tell her I'd come back, and not ask her to wait, because I did not think I had the right. 4 years is a long time to hold a gate shut in your mind. I had held it. I had told myself, through every cold and ugly stretch of those years, that she had married, that she had moved east, that she had sensibly gotten on with the business of living, and that when I came home, if I came home, I would find her gone or changed past knowing, and that this would be a mercy, because a woman like that deserved a whole man and I had come back in pieces. So I did not go to the Brennan place that first day. I took a room over the livery, and I lay on the narrow bed with my boots on, and I listened to the horses moving below me, and I did not sleep. It was the boy who found me. He came up the outside stair the next morning, a thin boy of about 10 in a coat that had been let out at the sleeves and patched at the elbow and was still too small, and he stood in my open doorway with the river light behind him, and looked at me with the frankest pair of eyes I ever met on a child. "You're the scout," he said, "the one that's back from the war." "I'm Caleb Ardmore," I said. "I don't know about scout anymore." "Miss Nora says you used to be the best man in this whole country for finding what was lost." He said it plainly, a fact he'd been handed, and then he tilted his head and inspected me the way you'd inspect a horse somebody was trying to sell you. "You don't look like much." I almost smiled. It was the first thing in a long time that had come near making me. "I don't feel like much either," I told him. "Who are you?" "Davy," he said. Then, as if it cost him nothing and meant everything, "I live with Miss Nora up at the Hollow Creek house. There's 8 of us." He paused. "Was 9. I sat up. "8 of you," I said. "She takes the ones nobody else'll have," Davy said, with a fierce little pride that I understood later he had earned the hard way. "After the wagons. You weren't here for the wagons." "No," I said, "I wasn't here." And so I heard it from a 10-year-old boy, standing in a livery doorway, the thing the whole town had lived through while I was gone. 2 winters back, a wagon company had come through Sweetgrass late in the season, the Hollow Creek Company, near 40 souls, bound for the valleys on the far side of the Bittern Range, and they had pushed for the high road over Sorrel Pass too late in the year against every warning a sane man could give them, because their captain was a fool who'd been promised land and would not wait out a winter to claim it. An early blizzard caught them strung out along the high country. Most of them did not come down. The few that did came down with frostbite and grief, and a handful of children whose parents were dead in the snow above the pass. And the town of Sweetgrass, which had warned them and been ignored, decided in the cold, practical way of frightened places that the dead had brought it on themselves, and that the living were somebody else's problem. Nora Brennan had decided otherwise. She had taken the children, first 2, then 4, then more as the winter shook them loose from whatever charity ran out first. The ones with no kin to wire, the ones too young or too strange or too marked by what they'd seen for anyone else to want. She had buried her own father that same hard winter, the fever taking him in February, and she had taken his empty house out past the edge of town, where Hollow Creek ran down to the Tamarack, and she had filled it with the territory's leavings, and she had kept them alive on her own 2 hands for 2 years, while the town that might have helped her looked the other way and told itself it was being prudent. 9, I said. You said 9. Davy's face closed up like a door. There was a baby, he said. Last winter we couldn't. He stopped. Miss Nora was up 3 nights with her. She still won't talk about it. I've been in some bad places in my life. I had just spent 4 years in the worst of them. But I will tell you that something in that boy's flat, careful little voice, the way he had clearly learned not to cry about a thing in a house where there was too much to cry about and not enough time, got under my guard in a way 4 years of war had not managed. I stood up. I do not entirely know why. I had told myself I had nothing left to give anyone. But I stood up, and I reached for my hat, and I said, "Take me up there." The Hollow Creek house sat a half-mile out past the last fence in town, a low log-in clapboard place with a sod-roofed lean-to thrown up against one end, and a garden gone to frost behind it, and a barn that wanted shoring before the snow came. I saw all of that before I saw her, because I am a man who reads ground and structure first. It is how I kept myself alive. I saw that the woodpile was too small for the size of the house and the season. I saw that the corral rail was down on the north side, and had been mended with rope where it should have been mended with timber, which meant either no timber or no man to set it. I saw a girl of about 14 hauling water 2 buckets at a time from the creek, and a smaller child minding a smaller one on the step, and a line of washing snapping in the cold wind, more washing than 4 years ago I would have believed one woman could be responsible for. I saw a house holding together by main force and will and not much else, and I was already, before I ever reached the door, doing the thing I had done all my life without meaning to, which was counting up what it would take to make it right. Then the door opened and Nora Brennan came out onto the step, drying her hands on her apron, and she stopped dead when she saw me, and 4 years went out of me like breath. She had changed. I want to say that because she would not have thanked me for pretending otherwise. She was thinner and there was gray at her temple that had not been there, and her hands when she lowered them were a working woman's hands now, chapped and strong, not the ink-stained hands of the schoolmaster's clever daughter. There were lines at the corners of her eyes that the wind and the worry had put there, but her eyes were the same. Her eyes had not given up 1 inch of ground to those 4 years, and they fixed on me, and her mouth opened, and what she said was not what I had braced for. She did not say, "I thought you were dead." She did not say, "Why didn't you write?" She looked at me a long, long moment, with the children gone still and watchful around her the way children go still when the grown people's air changes, and then her chin came up, and her voice when it came was steady as a fence post. "Well," Nora Brennan said, "you took your time." I have turned that over 1,000 times since. 3 words and a fourth, and every one of them a door she was holding open and daring me to be too much of a coward to walk through. You took your time. Not you left me. Not you didn't ask me to wait. She had decided, in the space of 1 breath on her own front step with a houseful of orphans watching, that we would not be 2 people who had wasted 4 years grieving the gate I'd shut. We would be 2 people who had simply been kept apart by hard country and a hard war, and who could, if one of us had the nerve, simply pick the thread back up. "I did," I said. My voice came out rough. "I'm sorry for it." "Don't be sorry on my step," she said. "Be useful or be gone, Caleb Ardmore. I haven't got room for any other kind of man." But her eyes were bright when she said it, too bright, and the boy Davy was looking between us with his mouth slightly open, and the 14-year-old girl had set down her water buckets, and I understood that I had walked, without meaning to, straight into the middle of a thing that had been waiting 4 years to happen, and would not now be stopped by anything as small as my conviction that I had nothing to give. "I can mend a corral rail," I said. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, but the country it lived in. "The north one's down," she said. I saw. "You would," she said, and turned and went back into the house, and left the door open behind her, which I have come to understand was the whole of her answer. I mended the corral rail that afternoon. I had ridden out meaning to walk away from Sweetgrass entire, to go up into the high country and homestead some hard quarter section, where I would not have to be looked at. And instead I spent the first afternoon of my life as a returned man on my knees in the cold mud of the Hollow Creek Corral, setting a new rail because there was timber in the barn after all good timber, only no one with the time or the back to use it. The 14-year-old girl, whose name was Sable, watched me from the creek with deep suspicion and would not say a word. Davy held the rail. A small fierce one named June carried me nails I did not need so that she would have a reason to stand near, and a boy of about 7 named Asano. I'll not use that one. The smallest boy was named Tip, and he simply stood 3 feet from my elbow and watched everything I did as if I were the most interesting thing that had ever happened, and did not speak. And Davy told me later that Tip had not spoken since the wagons, not one word in 2 years. And that Miss Nora said he would speak when he had something he wanted badly enough to say it for, and that until then they would all just have to be patient, the way she was patient about everything. I stayed for supper because Nora told me I would, not asked. It was a thin supper stretched thin, a pot of beans and side meat and corn bread, 8 children and 1 woman, and now one battered stranger around a long plank table her father had built. And grace said by Sable in a flat, fast voice. And I sat at the foot of that table in the lamplight and I watched Nora Brennan run her household. And somewhere in the middle of it, the thing I had carried home in my chest for 4 years, the cold, dead weight of it, shifted just slightly. The way river ice shifts in the first thaw with a sound you feel more than hear. She was magnificent. I will use the word and stand by it. She knew which child needed coaxing to eat and which needed to be left alone, which one's cough had gone 2 days too long, and which one was only after attention who had done their lessons. She still taught them, everyone around that same table, her father's books worn soft at the corners, and who was hiding a torn dress they were ashamed to mention. She did it all without raising her voice and without ever once, that I saw, sitting down. When the meal was done and the little ones were got to bed in the lean-to, and the older one set to the washing up, she finally lowered herself into the chair across from me with a cup of chicory she'd warmed twice, and she looked at me across the wreckage of the table, and she said, quietly, so the children would not hear, "How bad was it?" It was not a question. She knew. She had buried her father and a baby that was not hers by blood and held a county's grief in her 2 hands for 2 years. She knew what bad was and she could see it on me. And because she did not make it a question, I found I could answer it, which I had not been able to do for anyone, not the army surgeon, not the chaplain, not the men I had ridden home beside who had been in the same places I had. "Bad," I said. "I went out to find people, that was my work. Find the trail, find the camp, find the way through. I was good at it." I turned the cup in my hands. "And then the work changed near the end and they had me finding people so that other men could." I stopped. "There are things I will not say at a table where children have just risen from. I got good at finding," I said instead. "And then I could not stop seeing the ones I'd found. That's the whole of it. I came home because I thought if I stayed out there one more season, I'd be no use to anyone living. And then I came home, and found I was no use to anyone living here either, So you took a room over the livery and lay on a bed with your boots on, she said. I looked up sharp. She almost smiled. It's a small town, Caleb. Mrs. Pruitt at the livery has a mouth on her. Then the almost smile went and she leaned forward and she said the thing that I have decided in all the years since was the true beginning of the rest of my life, though neither of us knew it yet. You think you came home with nothing to give, she said. I have got 8 children, a barn that won't hold its own roof past the first heavy snow, a corral you've only half fixed, a land claim a man in town is trying to take out from under me, and a wood pile that is going to run out in January and kill one of us. I have not got the smallest particle of use for a man who hasn't anything to give. She held my eyes. So you'll either find you've got more than you think or you won't, and we'll all find out which together. Now. There's a cot in the barn and a horse blanket. It's cold, but it's dry. You can decide in the morning whether you're staying. I stayed. I told myself it was the barn roof. There was real work there a man could put his hands to, and work was the one thing in those days that quieted the noise in my head. When I was setting a beam or splitting a round, the cold, dead weight in my chest had something to push against, and the seeing got quieter. And for whole hours at a time I was only a man doing a thing that needed doing, which is as close to peace as I knew how to get back then. So I told myself I was staying for the roof. Then the roof was sound and I told myself I was staying for the wood, because Nora was right. The pile would not see them to spring, and there was standing dead timber up the hollow creek draw that wanted only a man with an axe and a will and the better part of 2 weeks. Then the wood was laid by. A wall of it, enough and more, and I could not any longer pretend I did not know why I was staying. I was staying because of her, and because of them, and because for the first time in 4 years I woke in the morning with a reason to put my boots on. That was not simply that the night was over. I want to tell it slow here, the way it happened, because the slowness was the whole of it. There was no lightning. We did not fall into each other's arms. We were both of us too marked and too careful for that, and there were 8 children always within earshot besides. What there was instead was 1,000 small things over the back end of that autumn, and the small things were how I came back to life. There was the morning I caught Sable, the 14-year-old, crying behind the barn because she had broken her dead mother's hair comb, the one thing she had left of her, and I sat down in the cold mud beside her and did not say a useless thing about how it would be all right, because she was old enough to know it would not. And instead I took the broken comb and looked at it the way I'd look at a problem of ground, and I said, bone or horn? And she said horn, and I said, I can fix horn. Won't be like new, there'll be a seam, but it'll hold. And I did fix it, with a sliver of brass and a deal of patience, over 3 evenings at the table while she pretended not to watch. And when I gave it back to her, there was a fine bright seam down the spine of it. And she looked at that seam a long time, and then she looked at me and she said, it's better with the seam. And from that day Sable was on my side, and a 14-year-old girl who has decided to be on your side is a more loyal thing than any soldier I ever served with. There was the matter of Tip, the small boy who did not speak. I did not try to make him. I had been around enough silence by then to respect another man's, even a small one's. But I noticed that he followed me, and I noticed that what he followed me to watch, particularly, was anything to do with finding tracks in the first snow, the way I read which way a rabbit had gone, the way I could tell from the disturbed needles under a pine that a deer had bedded there in the night. So I started, without making anything of it, teaching him. I'd crouch by a track and look at him, and he'd crouch by it too and look where I looked, and I'd hold up 2 fingers for 2 animals, or point the way a thing had gone, and he'd nod, grave as a judge. And once, only once that whole autumn, when I pointed wrong on purpose to test him, he shook his head hard and pointed the right way, the correct way, the way the fox had actually gone, and I looked at him and he looked at me, and I swear that boy was a hair's breadth from speaking. I could see the word sitting right behind his teeth, and then he closed up again, but I'd seen it. I told Nora that night. He's in there, I said. He's all the way in there. He's just waiting on something big enough to come out for. And Nora looked at me across the lamp and she said, I know. I've been waiting 2 years with him. I'm glad someone else can see it. And that was the night, I think, though neither of us said a word out of turn, that we both knew what we were to each other and had decided not to be in a hurry about it. And there was Davy, who attached himself to me the way iron filings go to a magnet, and who asked me 1,000 questions about the war I would not answer and 1,000 more about the high country that I would, and who told me, in pieces, over those weeks, the things the grown people would not say in front of the children, and the children would only say to each other. It was Davy who first said the name Larkspur Station to me, and I did not understand at first what I was being told, and when I did understand, the cold, dead weight in my chest came back all at once and did not shift for 3 days. What he told me was this. When the Hollow Creek Company was caught in the blizzard up at Sorrel Pass, 2 winters gone, they had not all been together. The company had strung out, the way companies do on a hard climb, the strong wagons ahead and the weak behind, and when the storm hit the line in the middle, so that some were below the worst of it and some were above. The ones below straggled down to Sweetgrass in 2s and 3s over the following week, frostbit and broken. The ones caught in the middle, on the pass itself, mostly died there, and those were the parents of the children Nora had taken in. But there had been wagons above the pass, 2, 3 of them the strongest, the captains among them, and those 3, the story in town went, had made it over the top and down the far side into the western valleys before the storm sealed the road, and were therefore gone west, no longer Sweetgrass's concern, lost to the country, the way wagons were always being lost to the country. That was the story the town told. But Davy, who heard everything and forgot nothing, told me a different one. Davy told me that one of the men who had come down off the pass alive, an old teamster named Hobart who drank now at the back of the Sweetgrass saloon and would talk to a child when he would not talk to a grown man, had told Davy that the 3 wagons above the pass had not made it over. That they had turned back when they saw the storm, the way sensible men should have done from the start, and tried to come down again to shelter, and that the old way station up there, Larkspur Station, a stage stop abandoned years before, half burned in a fire and never rebuilt, that they had forayed up in what was left of Larkspur Station to wait out the storm, and that the storm had not let up for 9 days, and that by the time it cleared, the pass below them was sealed with 30 feet of snow and would not open till the spring melt, and that no one in Sweetgrass, counting their own dead and licking their own wounds, had thought it worth the dying to go up and find out whether anyone at Larkspur was still breathing. They wrote 'em off, Davy said in that flat little voice. Hobart says there was maybe 2, 3 children up there, little ones, and some grown folks, and by spring everybody just said they'd gone west because it was easier than saying nobody went to look. I did not sleep that night. I lay on the cot in the barn with the new-laid woodpile a black wall against the stars in the door, and I did the thing I do, the thing the army had made of me, which is I worked the ground in my head. I knew Sorrel Pass. I had crossed it as a young man before the war more than once. I knew Larkspur Station. I had sheltered there myself one bad night in the ruin of it years ago. And I knew, lying there, 3 things that the town of Sweetgrass had been careful not to let itself know for 2 winters. I knew that a half-burned stage station, even a ruined one, would have a sound cellar, because they always built the cellars stone, and a stone cellar will hold heat and hold off cold and hold off weather better than any cabin. I knew that the western valleys below the pass, where the town said the 3 wagons had gone, were good hunting country, full of game even in winter, and that a man who knew it and the captain, fool that he was, had at least been west before, could keep people alive there a long time. And I knew, because I had spent 4 years learning it in my bones until it nearly killed me, that the difference between the lost and the dead is very often nothing more than whether one single person is willing to go and look. I did not say any of this to Nora the next morning. I want to be honest about that too. I was afraid of it. I had come home swearing I was done with finding, done with going up into hard country after people who were probably past saving, done with the seeing. The thought of going up Sorrel Pass in the teeth of the closing season on the strength of a drunk teamster's 2-year-old story to look for children who were almost certainly long dead. It was the exact shape of the thing I had run home to get away from. So I said nothing. I split wood. I mended the barn. I taught Tip to read the snow. I let myself, day by day, fall the rest of the way in love with a woman and a house full of children. And I told myself that was enough, that I had earned the right to a small, warm life, and could leave the high country and its dead to themselves. It held for about 2 weeks. Then Orrin Tasker came out to the Hollow Creek house, and everything I had been trying not to know came up out of the ground at once. Tasker was the landman. I had heard his name in town before I ever saw his face, heard it the way you hear the name of weather that's coming. He had come to Sweetgrass while I was at the war and bought up paper, mostly. Notes, liens, the debts of dead men and broke men, the quiet legal threads that a patient man with money can pull until a whole valley comes loose in his hands. He was not an outlaw. I want to be clear about that because it would be an easier story if he were, and the truth of him was worse and quieter than an outlaw. He never raised a hand. He never raised his voice. He came out to the Hollow Creek house on a good horse in a good coat with a leather folio under his arm and 2 men who were not quite hired guns and not quite clerks riding behind him. And he took off his hat to Nora on her own step, and he was, the entire time, unfailingly polite, and he was trying to take everything she had. The claim was the thing. Nora's father had filed on the Hollow Creek quarter section years before and proved it up, and when he died it had passed to her, and it was the one solid thing under the children's feet. The house, the creek, the timber up the draw, the garden ground. But her father had borrowed against it in his last sick winter to pay the doctor and feed a house that had suddenly filled with other people's children, and that note had been among the paper Orrin Tasker bought. He had not pressed it while he gathered the rest. Now, with winter coming and the town soft on the subject of a house full of orphans nobody wanted to pay for, he had decided the time was right. He stood on the step and he explained to Nora, in the gentlest voice imaginable, that the note was past due, that he was within his rights to foreclose, that he was a reasonable man and had no wish to put a woman in her. He paused on the word delicately, her charges out in the cold, and that he would therefore make her a generous offer. She would sign over the claim, and he would let her stay through the winter as a tenant at a rent, and they could all be comfortable and avoid any unpleasantness. I was up on the barn roof when he came, laying the last of the new shakes, and I came down off it slow and stood at the corner of the barn with a froe still in my hand and watched, because it was not my place to speak and I knew it. Nora did not need me to speak. I want that understood. She stood on her own step in her apron with the cold wind off the creek pulling at her hair, and she listened to the whole of Orrin Tasker's gentle, reasonable offer without once interrupting him, and when he was done she said, "No." Just that, the same way she'd said you took your time to me. One word holding a door shut against a thing that thought it was bigger than her. Tasker smiled, sorrowful and patient. "Mrs. Brennan." "Miss," she said. "Miss Brennan, I don't think you appreciate your position." He tapped the folio. "The note is real. The court is 2 days' ride and disposed to be sensible. You've no man on the place, no income but charity, and 8 mouths the county is frankly tired of feeding. I am offering you a winter indoors. The alternative is you're off this ground by the first hard freeze, you and all of them, and I needn't tell you what that means for the little ones." And there it was, the soft cruelty of him, the thing worse than a raised hand, that he would stand on a woman's step and threaten her with the freezing of children in the same gentle voice he'd have used to remark on the price of corn. I felt the froe in my hand, and I felt the old cold thing in my chest go very still and very clear, the way it used to go before bad work, and I will not pretend I did not think, for one ugly moment, about the two men behind him and how I would take them and how easy it would be. 4 years had left that in me, and I am not proud of it. But Nora spoke first, and what she said put the fro down for me better than my own better nature could have. "Mr. Tasker," she said, "you've done your figuring and I'll do mine. You think I've no man, no money, and a town that's tired of me. You're right on 2 counts, but you've made a clerk's error, and it's this. You've reckoned what I have, and you forgot to reckon what I'll do. I have buried my father and a child not my own in the ground up that hill, and I have kept 8 more alive through 2 winters that you spent in a warm office buying up dead men's debts, and I have not once, not for 1 hour of it, been off this ground or going to be. You can bring your note and your court and your 2 men who'd rather be anywhere else, judging by their faces, and I will be standing exactly here. Now take your hat off my fence post and get off my claim, and tell yourself on the ride back that you frightened a woman if it helps you sleep. You didn't." There was a silence after that you could have built a house in. One of the 2 men behind Tasker, the younger one, was looking at his own saddle horn and plainly wishing himself elsewhere. Tasker's gentle face had gone a shade tighter at the eyes, the only crack I ever saw in it, and he settled his hat back on and said, very quietly, "The first hard freeze, Miss Brennan," and reined around and rode out, and his 2 men followed, and the younger one looked back once at the house, at the children's faces in the window, and then would not look again. I came up out of the barn shadow and crossed to the step. Nora was still standing exactly where she'd stood, and now that he was gone I could see what it had cost her. Her hands were shaking just slightly down at her sides, and her chin was still up, but it was up the way a thing is held up by main strength, against everything that wants it down. She did not look at me. She looked out at the road where Tasker's dust was settling, and she said low, so the children could not hear, "I lied. He did frighten me." "I know," I said. "Then say something useful, or don't say anything." I thought about it. There were a great many things a man might have said, and most of them were the useless kind, the kind that are really about making the man who says them feel better. I had spent 4 years learning the difference between the words that help and the words that only fill the air. So what I said was the true thing, the only useful thing I had. "The note's real," I said, "and the court'll likely back him. You're right about that, so we don't fight him in the court, we pay the note." She turned and looked at me then. "There's standing timber up the draw worth money to the mine at Cobb's Ferry if a man cut it and hauled it. There's the hay you've got laid by you don't need all of. There's my back wages from the army, which I haven't touched because I had nothing I wanted to spend them on." I held her eyes. "It won't be easy and it won't be sure. But the figure he's owed is a figure, Nora. Figures can be met. He's counting on you not knowing that. You know it now." She looked at me a long while. The shaking had gone out of her hands. "Why?" she said. "Why would you? It's not your claim, it's not your children. You came home to be left alone. You told me that yourself the first night. You said you had nothing to give." "I was wrong," I said. "It was the plainest thing I ever said to anyone, and the hardest and the truest. About all of it. I came home to be left alone because I thought being left alone was the safe thing. It isn't. It's just the empty thing. I'd rather have the work than the empty, Nora. I'd rather have you and them and a fight I might lose than a warm room and nothing in it. That's the whole of my reason, and you can do with it what you like." She did a thing then I did not expect. She reached out and took the fro out of my hand. I had forgotten I was still holding it, and she looked at it and at me, and she said, "You can put the tools down when there's a man at the gate, Caleb. I had a husband at this place for about 4 years before I knew it, who I never married and who put down his fro when it mattered. I don't need you to be hard for me. I've been hard enough for the both of us for 2 years. I need you to be the other thing." And she put the fro down on the step herself, deliberate between us, and she did not take my hand because Sable was in the doorway and Tip was in the window. But she stood close enough that the wanting to was its own kind of speech. And that was the autumn. That was how it went. A fro set down on a cold step, and 2 people who had each carried more than their share deciding, without one word that the children could repeat at school, that they would carry the rest of it together. We made our plan that night at the long table after the little ones were down. It was a good plan and a hard one. I would take the timber up the draw, cut it through November while the weather held, and haul it the 2 days to the mine at Cobb's Ferry. My army wages would meet the better part of the note, and the timber money would meet the rest, with a margin for the winter besides if the snow held off long enough. Sable, who could cipher better than I could, kept the figures, and Davy was given the great responsibility of the woodlot and was so proud of it he could barely sit still. And even Tip, when I drew in the ash on the hearthstone a little map of the draw and the timber and the road to Cobb's Ferry, leaned in and studied it with his grave dark eyes and put one small finger on the spot where the road forked, the wrong fork, and looked up at me. And I understood he was asking, and I said, "No. That one goes to the old pass road, we don't want that one." And he nodded, satisfied, and I did not think anything of it then. I thought of it a great deal afterward. Because that map, drawn in hearthash to plan a timber haul, was the first time the old pass road, the road up to Sorrel Pass, and over it, and past the burned ruin of Larkspur Station, was spoken of out loud in that house since I'd come. And a thing spoken of out loud in a house like that does not stay spoken of only once. The cold dead weight in my chest, the one that had been shifting all autumn, came back whole the day Hobart walked up the Hollow Creek road. He was an old man and a ruined one, and he came on foot, which told me he'd sold or drunk his last horse, and he came slow, the way a man comes who is not sure of his welcome and has decided to risk it anyway. Davy saw him first and went still and then went to him, which told me a good deal, that, whatever Hobart was to the rest of the town, he was something gentler to the children, the one grown man who had come down off that pass alive and had never once in 2 years told them their dead had brought it on themselves. He had told Davy the truth instead, which is a harder gift and a kinder one. Nora brought him in and sat him by the fire and gave him coffee, real coffee, the last of it, which I understood was a thing she did on purpose, a courtesy to a man the town had stopped extending courtesies to. He wrapped both shaking hands around the cup and he looked at me a long time and then he said, "You're the scout. Ardmore, I knew your father." And then, before I could answer, with the directness of a man who has decided he hasn't time left to be indirect, "You been up Sorrel Pass." "As a young man," I said, "before the war more than once." "You been to Larkspur?" The room had gone quiet. Nora had stopped with the coffee pot in her hand. The children, who could read the air of that house better than any almanac, had drifted in from their chores and were ranged along the wall, silent, watching, Tip among them with his grave dark eyes fixed on the old man's face. "I sheltered there one night years back," I said. "In the ruin of it, there's a stone cellar under the burned half, sound, dry." Hobart closed his eyes. When he opened them they were wet, and he did not bother to hide it, an old man past the age of minding who saw him weep. "Sound and dry," he said. "Sound and dry." He set the cup down with a click. "I have carried this 2 years, son, and the town won't hear it, and I am too old and too poor and too well known a drunk for anyone to believe, and I am going to die this winter or the next, and I'll not carry it into the ground. There was children at Larkspur. When the storm sealed the pass below us and we that could still walk came down, there was 3 wagons fortayed up in that ruin behind us, and I saw them go in. I saw them get the stock and the children down into that cellar you're speaking of, and I heard the captain shout down the line that they'd waited out, that they had powder, and the high country was thick with game and they'd come down at the spring melt or work west when the weather broke." He was gripping his own knees now. "And the spring melt came. And nobody went up. Nobody went up, Ardmore. The town had its own dead to bury, and it was easier to say they'd gone west. But the western road from Larkspur is 40 mile of bad country, and the captain had a broke leg. I saw it broke, and there was a woman near her time, and there was little ones. I have lain awake 2 years asking myself, could they have walked out west, broke-legged and brought to bed and carrying bobbies, 40 mile of winter country, and could they have, son? Could they?" "No," I said. The word came out of me flat and certain, and I felt Nora flinch at the certainty of it. But Hobart had asked me a question of ground and country, and ground and country were the one thing I did not lie about to anyone ever. Not broke-legged, not a woman near her time, not with little ones, not 40 Mile, not in winter. They'd have known that. A man with a broke leg and a thinking head doesn't try 40 Mile of winter country. He forts up where there's a stone cellar and game close by, and he waits for someone to come. For someone to come, Hobart repeated, and the tears ran down into the gray stubble of his jaw, and he did not wipe them. And nobody came. The fire popped. Out in the lean-to a child turned over in sleep. And into that silence, in the flat, careful voice I had come to know, Davy said the thing that none of the grown people in that room had let themselves say out loud in 2 years. "My cousin was up there," Davy said. "Posy, she was 4, she'd be 6 now." He looked at me and there was no childishness in his face at all, only a terrible grown-up steadiness. "Everybody says she went west. I never believed it. You don't go west when you're 4, you wait. I'd have waited." His voice did not break. That was the worst of it, that a boy could say a thing like that and his voice not break, because he had learned in that house that breaking was a thing you did not have time for. "You said the difference between lost and dead is whether somebody goes to look." He had remembered it. I had said it to him weeks before about something small and he had kept it. "Is that true?" And there it was. The whole of it, come up out of the ground at last, in the voice of a 10-year-old boy who had decided to believe me because I was the only grown man who had ever told him the truth about anything. I looked at Nora. She had set the coffee pot down. Her face had gone white and still, and I could see her doing the thing I was doing, the brutal arithmetic of it. The season, the pass already taking snow at the top, the near certainty that anyone up there had died in the first winter despite the cellar and the game, the children in this room who needed her alive and here, and not frozen in a drift on a fool's climb after the long dead. She was the most responsible soul I ever knew. She had 8 living children depending on her. Everything in her duty said the word the whole town had said for 2 years, the sensible word, the word that let you sleep, gone west. And I watched her not say it. I watched Nora Brennan look at Davy, and at Tip, and at the white faces of the children along the wall, and at me, and I watched her decide. The way she decided on her own step that we would not waste 4 years grieving a shut gate, the way she decided to take in the territory's leavings when the whole town looked away, that she would not be a person who said gone west because it was easier. "How long," she said to me, her voice was steady, "if a man went up, how long before the pass seals for good?" I did the figuring I had already done, lying awake on the barn cot. "The top's taking snow now," I said. "Light. It won't hold a man back yet. 2 weeks of this weather, 3 if we're lucky, and then the first real storm comes down off the bittern and seals it till May. After that nobody goes up and nobody comes down till the melt." I made myself say the rest because she would have in my place. "And Nora, it's 2 years. The cellar and the game give a chance, a real one, more than the town let itself believe. But 2 years is 2 winters. The honest reckoning is that a man who goes up likely finds graves, or finds nothing. Likely he risks the climb and the season and finds he's too late by a year and a half." "Likely," she said. "Likely. But not certain." "No," I said. "Not certain with that cellar and that country, not certain. There's a chance. I won't make it bigger than it is, but it's a real one and it's a closing one." She was quiet a moment. Then she said the thing that told me, past any more doubting, what she was and why I loved her. "A closing chance at a child's life," she said, "is not a thing this house writes off. We of all houses." She looked at the children along the wall, every one of them a closing chance that someone 2 winters back had decided to take. "We of all houses don't say gone west." "Nora," I said, "if I go up I might not come down. That's the other half of it. You've 8 here that need you and they'd need me too now, and I'd be gambling that against a chance. I'll not pretend it's a clean sum." "It's not a clean sum," she said. "There's no clean sum in it any direction. If you go you might die and leave 9 of us grieving. If you don't go and they're up there, we live the rest of our lives the way Hobart's lived his." She looked at the old man who had his face in his hands. I'll not choose for you, Caleb. It's your back and your legs and your life that make the climb. But I'll tell you what I'd think of a man who went, and what I'd think of a town that let him go alone, and what I am going to do either way. Which is I'm going to send a fast rider to the county seat tonight to file a notice that there may be survivors of the Hollow Creek Company at Larkspur Station. So it's on the record and Tasker's foreclosure can wait on a matter of life. And so that, if you don't come down, somebody in this country besides me knows why you went up. And I'm going to outfit you proper, because I'll not have you climbing on beans and a horse blanket. And I am going to be standing at the bottom of that pass when you come down, with a fire lit and water hot, for however many you bring or for you alone. She took a breath. That's what I'm going to do. The going up is yours to choose. I have been asked in the years since what made me decide. People want it to be a grand thing. They want me to say it was duty, or the children's faces, or some squaring of accounts with all the men I'd failed to find alive in the war. And there is some truth in all of that. But the real thing, the thing that put me on my feet and sent me to the barn to lay out the climb, was smaller and stranger than any of it. It was Tip. The boy who did not speak had come away from the wall while we talked, quiet as he did everything, and he had come to the hearth where I'd drawn the ash map weeks before, the map of the timber draw and the road to Cobb's Ferry. And he had crouched there, and with one small finger he had redrawn it, not the timber road. The other one. The fork I'd told him we didn't want. The old pass road up to Sorrel, the way to Larkspur. He drew it in the ash, the whole climbing line of it from memory, from the one time I traced it for him and said we don't want that one. And at the top of it he made a small square, a building, a station. And beside the square he pressed his thumb down twice, 2 small marks too, and then he looked up at me, this boy who had not said a word in 2 years, and he held up 2 fingers, and his whole face was one wordless question, and the question was, will you go up and get the 2? And I understood all at once what Nora had meant when she said he would speak when he had something big enough to come out for. He had been listening for 2 years to a town that said gone west. He had been listening, his whole silent self, for one grown man to say the other thing. And he had drawn me the road and held up 2 fingers and asked me the only question that had ever in 2 years seemed to him worth the breaking of his silence to ask. I crouched down across the ash map from him. I put my 2 fingers up against his 2 fingers and I held them there and I said, I'll go up and get the 2. I give you my word, Tip. I'll go up Sorrel Pass and I'll go into that station, and if there's a living soul in that cellar I'll bring them down to this house. And if there's not, I'll come down and tell you the truth of it so you don't have to wonder for 60 years like Hobart. Either way I come back down to you. That's my word. Tip looked at our 2 pairs of fingers pressed together over the ash. And then he opened his mouth, and in a small, rusted, unused voice, the voice of a boy reaching back across 2 years of silence for the first word he judged worth saying, he said, Posey. That was all, one name. The name of the cousin a town had written off, the 4-year-old who'd be 6 now, the closing chance. Davy made a sound like he'd been struck. Nora's hand went to her mouth. Sable started to cry without any shame at all. And I knelt on the hearth with my 2 fingers against that small boy's 2 fingers and the single broken word hanging in the firelight, and I knew there was no power on the earth that would keep me off that pass. Posey, I said back to him. I'll find her if she's there to find. I promise you, Tip, I'll bring you Posey. I left at dawn 2 days later, outfitted the way Nora had sworn I'd be, not on beans and a horse blanket but with a good mountain horse and a sound pack mule, with rope and a felling axe and a shovel for snow, with grain for the stock and dried meat and meal, and a side of bacon and coffee and sugar enough to feed a cellar full of the half-starved if I found them, with blankets and a wall of split kindling, lashed to the mule because a man who finds the freezing needs fire before anything. And with a smaller thing I have kept to this day, a child's wool comforter that Sable had knitted in 2 days and nights without sleep, blue and uneven, and made with a 14-year-old's whole fierce heart. For Posey, she said, for when you find her, so the first thing she feels is something warm. Nora rode with me as far as the foot of the pass, where the old road left the timber and began to climb in earnest. And there we stopped, because past there it was no place for a horse to wait two up, and she would take her mount back down and keep the fire I'd come back to. We sat our horses a moment at the bottom of that white climbing road, the Bittern Range standing up enormous and indifferent above us. And there was a great deal I might have said, and she might have said, and we said almost none of it, because we were neither of us people who spent words where they weren't needed, and because everything that mattered had already been said in a fro set down on a cold step. What she said was, "Come down. I aim to. I don't care what you find up there, graves or nothing or a cellar full of the living. I'll be glad of any of it, and so will they, and will grieve what wants grieving and be glad of what wants gladness. But the thing I need down that road, the one thing, is you. So whatever else you do or don't do up there, you come down. You've a boy who said his first word in 2 years to send you, and 7 more who have decided you're theirs, and a woman who waited 4 years for you once and has discovered she has not got another 4 in her. Come down, Caleb. That's the whole of my instruction, and there's no part of it about the children up there. God forgive me. It's all about the one beside me. Come down." I leaned across the gap between our horses and I kissed her, the first time, there at the bottom of Sorrel Pass in the cold dawn with no children to see. And it was not a young man's kiss and not a desperate one. It was the kiss of 2 people who had each been to the bottom of things and found, late and against all expectation, a reason to climb back up. And then I turned my horse to the white road, and I did not look back, because if I'd looked back I might not have gone, and I went up. I will not give you every hour of that climb, because much of it was only the brutal arithmetic of cold and altitude, and a man pushing 2 animals up a closing road against the season. It took me the better part of 2 days. The first day was hard but plain, the old road, drifted but readable, switchbacking up through the timber into the bare country above. The second day was the bad one. The weather, which had held gray and still, began to move. I could feel the first real storm gathering its shoulders up behind the peaks the way you feel a thing in your teeth before you hear it. And I knew I had a day, perhaps a day and a half, before the Bittern came down off its heights and sealed that pass till May with me on the wrong side of it. I pushed the stock harder than was kind. Near the top the snow was to the horse's chest in the drifted places, and I broke trail on foot ahead of them with the shovel. And the cold dead weight in my chest had gone very quiet, the way it always did when there was hard ground work to push against. And for the first time since the war I was glad of the thing the war had made me, because the thing the war had made me was a man who could keep going up a closing pass in worsening weather after a chance, and not stop. I came over the top of Sorrel Pass in the failing light of the second day, and there below me, in a high bowl of snow under the gathering storm, black against the white, half fallen, exactly where Hobart said it would be, stood the ruin of Larkspur Station. There was smoke. I want to set that down plainly, the way it came to me, because I have lived a long life since, and I do not think anything will ever again land in me the way that thin gray thread of smoke landed, rising from the burned and broken shape of that old station into the failing light. Smoke means fire, and fire means a hand to lay it, and a hand to lay it means a living thing. And I stood at the top of the pass with my heart going like a hammer, and I did the only thing a man can do with a thing too big to feel all at once, which is I made myself move. I came down into the bowl. I came down to the station calling out, calling that I was a friend, that I'd come up from Sweetgrass, that I'd come to bring them down, calling it over and over so that whoever was down in that cellar would not take me for a bear or a bandit and do something we'd all regret. And a door I had not known was a door, a slab of planking set into the snow against the stone foundation of the burned half, scraped open. And a man's face looked out, gaunt past anything I have words for, bearded white, with eyes that had the particular emptiness I knew from my own shaving mirror, the eyes of a person who has waited a very long time for something that stopped coming. And the gaunt man looked at me, A stranger in the snow with a horse and a mule and a wall of split kindling, and his cracked lips moved, and what he said, in a voice rusted nearly past use, the way Tip's voice had been rusted, was, "Did somebody finally come?" "Somebody finally came," I said. "I've come to take you down, all of you. How many are you?" He began to weep, the silent shaking weeping of a person too depleted to make the sound of it, and he said, "4. We were 11, we're 4. But we're 4, mister, we held on to 4. And he could not go on, and another shape moved behind him in the dark of the cellar, and a thin, worn woman came to the door holding a child, and behind her a boy of 9 or 10 with the same gaunt, waiting face, and the woman looked at me and could not speak at all, and the child in her arms. The child in her arms was a small girl, thin as a winter bird, with great dark eyes in a pale face. And she looked at me over the woman's shoulder with the grave, unblinking stare of a child who has seen too much and learned to watch everything, and I knew her. God help me, I had never laid eyes on her in my life, and I knew her, because she had Tip's exact eyes. The same grave, dark, watching eyes, and I got down off my horse in the snow, and I came to the door slow and gentle so as not to frighten her, and I crouched down to her level the way I'd crouched to read tracks with the boy who'd sent me, and I said, "Is your name Posey?" The dark eyes went wide, the thin little face crumpled and uncrumpled, and in a whisper, the smallest sound, a child confirming her own name to a stranger because no stranger had spoken it in 2 years. "Posey." "Posey?" I said, and my own voice was not steady, and I did not care. "I've got a cousin of yours named of Tip waiting for you at the bottom of this mountain, and a whole house full of children besides, that are going to be your brothers and sisters, and a woman named Nora who's got a fire lit and water hot for you right now. And in my pack I've got a blue comforter a girl named Sable knitted you with her own hands, so the first thing you'd feel when I found you was something warm." I reached into the pack slow, and I drew out Sable's uneven blue comforter, and I wrapped it around that thin little bird of a child, and her great dark eyes looked down at the warm blue wool of it, the first new thing I would learn that had touched her in 2 years, and then looked back up at me, and she put one small hand flat against my cold cheek, the way a child does when it is deciding whether to believe a thing, and she said, "Are we going home?" "We're going home," I said. "First thing in the morning, we're going home. I will pass quickly over the night, because it was only the work of keeping 4 half-starved people alive through one more cold dark. The fire built up, the broth made slow and given slower because a starved body cannot take much at once, the stock seen to, the storm holding off through the dark hours, by a mercy I have never stopped being grateful for. The gaunt man was the captain, the fool who'd pushed the company too late into the season, and he knew it, had known it every hour of 2 years, and had kept these 4 alive in penance with the same stubbornness that had killed the rest. And I found I could not hate him, watching him spoon broth into the children before he'd take a drop himself. The worn woman was not his wife. His wife was one of the 7 the mountain had taken. She was a widow of the company who'd lost her own husband and taken up the captain's burden beside him, the 2 of them holding 4 children out of the dark by main force the way Nora had held 8. And I thought, not for the first time, that the whole of what is good in people is just this, just somebody deciding not to let go of somebody else. We came down in the morning ahead of the storm. It was the hardest day's work of my life, and I will not pretend the climb down a closing pass with 4 depleted souls, and the bittern coming down behind us was anything but terrible, and I will not pretend I was sure, any hour of it, that we'd make the bottom before the snow sealed us in. But the mountain, having taken 11, seemed content to let the 4 go, and we came down out of the white into the timber, as the first hard flakes of the real storm came hissing down behind us, and we came around the last shoulder of the old road to the flat at the bottom of the pass, and there was a fire lit, and water hot, and Nora Brennan standing exactly where she'd said she would stand, with the whole houseful of children ranged around her in the snow, every one of them. She had brought every one of them down to wait, and Tip was out in front of all of them with his grave, dark eyes fixed on the road. And when he saw the small shape of Posey on the saddle in front of me, wrapped in Sable's blue wool, his cousin, the closing chance, come down at last off the mountain that had taken everyone. Tip ran. He ran up that snowy road faster than I'd ever seen him move, and Posey saw him, and she made a sound I had not heard her make, a child's pure cry, and she was down off the horse and into the snow, and the two of them came together in the middle of the road in a tangle of blue wool and thin arms. Two children a town had written off, holding on to each other in the snow, and Tip was talking, the words coming out of him in a flood now that the dam was broken. 2 years of saved-up words pouring out over the head of the cousin he'd never stopped believing was alive. And I sat my horse at the bottom of Sorrel Pass and watched a silent boy find his voice for good, and I felt the cold dead weight in my chest, the thing I had carried home from 4 years of war, the thing I had been so sure would never lift. I felt it lift. Not shift. Lift. Go. Out of me and up and gone into the falling snow, and what was left in the place of it was not empty. It was the fullest I have ever been. Nora came to my stirrup. She did not say anything clever. She looked up at me, and at the 4 I'd brought down, and at the 2 children tangled together in the snow, and the tears were running down her face and freezing in the cold, and she put her hand on my cold hand where it rested on the saddle horn, and she said the only word that was needed, which was the same word she'd said at the bottom of the pass when she sent me up. Down, she said. You came down. I came down, I said. I brought you the 2, I brought you 4. You brought me you, she said. The rest is the miracle, you're the thing I asked for. There is not a great deal more to tell, and what there is good, and I'll tell it quick the way the rest wanted telling slow. The storm that sealed the pass behind us that morning would have sealed those 4 in their cellar till May, and the captain told me later by the fire at the Hollow Creek house that they'd not have lasted to May. The game had thinned, the powder was near gone, they'd been down to their last hopeless margin. 1 more week. We had come up the closing road with 1 week to spare in 2 years, and I have never since been able to hear a man say a thing was hopeless without thinking of that margin and going to look. Orrin Tasker did not get the claim. The notice Nora filed at the county seat, that there might be survivors of the Hollow Creek Company at Larkspur, turned out to matter more than either of us had reckoned, because when 4 of them came down alive, it became a thing the whole territory heard about. The scout who went up the closing pass after the children, a town rode off, and the county is a place like any other that would rather be on the right side of a story than the wrong one once the story's been told. The note got paid, my army wages and the timber money met it, just as I'd figured, and Sable's ciphering was off by less than $1, and Tasker took his money and his gentle voice and his 2 reluctant men and went to find some quieter valley to pull loose, and I will not say I was sorry to see the back of his good coat. The younger of his 2 men, the one who looked back at the children's faces in the window, did not go with him. He came out to the Hollow Creek place a week later and asked, awkward and red, whether a man who was handy and willing might find honest work at a house with that many mouths and that much ground. And we took him on, because Nora Brennan does not turn away a person who's decided to be better than the thing they were, that being more or less the founding principle of the entire household. Nora and I married in the spring, when the pass opened and the country greened in the little crooked steepled church in Sweetgrass, and there were 10 children in the front pews, the 8 she'd taken in, and Posey, and a small boy the captain and the widow could not keep, the 2 of them having decided to marry themselves and go west at last, properly outfitted and properly timed, but with 1 child too many for the start they were making, and so we had 10, and then over the years that followed we had more. Because once a house has decided what it is, the territory keeps finding its way to the door, and Nora Brennan never once, to the end of her long life, said gone west to a child on her step. Tip never went quiet again. He grew up to be the best man in that whole country for finding what was lost, better than I ever was, and I taught him, every track and sign and red of the ground I knew, on the understanding between us that the finding was for bringing people down, always home, and he honored it. He found lost children and lost herds and lost old men wandered off in the snow for 40 years, and folks for 100 miles knew that if Tip Ardmore, he took my name, they all did in time, if Tip Ardmore would go up after your lost one, then your lost one had a chance. A real one, a closing one maybe, but real. And that Tip Ardmore did not say a thing was hopeless and did not go quiet and did not write a soul off, having been written off himself once. By a town that found it easier. And brought down a mountain instead by a man who'd come home from a war certain. He had nothing left to give. I think of that often, here at the end of my own long road. I came home to Sweetgrass sure I was a ghost, sure the best of me was buried in country I'd never name, sure that the kindest thing I could do for the living was to leave them be. And a woman on a doorstep told me to be useful or be gone, and a boy held up 2 fingers, and I learned the thing I should have known all along and had to climb a closing pass to find out, that a man is not made whole by being left alone with what's broken in him. He's made whole by being needed, and by going up the hard road into the cold, after the ones the world's given up on and coming back down with them in his arms.